Blau und weiß sein Leben lang. Hallo, meine Leute. Willkommen zum einzigen Schalke Podcast auf English. That's right, folks. Officially the world's only English Schalke podcast. This is episode 119 of SchalkeMerica. I'm your host, Richard Kharman. Joining me on the show, as always, is Jack Mangan. Jack, how we doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Soccer? Never heard of it.
What? Who? What? When? Where? Why? What?
Not a thing I'm familiar with.
Yeah. It's been a crazy weekend, but before we get into that, we need some help on this to kind of make sure we don't vent too much, I guess. We're gonna bring in the most capped guest on our show. Everyone knows her. It's Marie Schulte-Bochum from the Transfer Exchange Show and so much more. Willkommen, Marie. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me again. And unlike Schalke's case, things are looking up in my life, not down.
Marie, the last time we had you on, I believe that you were joining us from an island in the middle of the sea. Judging by the time of day that we are recording this, I'm assuming you're back stateside with us now. Is that correct?
Yes, I am on the island of Manhattan now. So
still I was gonna say,
living that island life. Yeah. Yes.
We got an island girl with us right now. I like it. All right. Before we get into all the chaos, there was a matter of the Stuttgart match that we had to get into. We're not going to get into too much crazy enough because there was no passion on that pitch. The first two goals, I think we really do want to talk about. The two goals by Endo. It's something that's been plaguing us all season long. Set pieces, Jack. And the first two goals, very indicative, very similar to each other, weren't they?
Yeah, I believe James Thurgood, who was on the call for us, who were watching ESPN at least, used the phrase carbon copy to describe the relationship of the second goal to the first. And I think that's spot on. It's hilarious. It looks like we're doing a combination of sort of zonal and man-to-man marking on these, where Mustafi and I think Zhiyun and maybe Hoppe sometimes are sort of setting up shop centrally around the penalty box. And then the rest of the players that we have in the box are man marking. And Stuttgart was just sending an extra man on both occasions, and everyone rushes into the center of the box. So the people that are man marking follow those guys, and then Endo's left on the back post, and it was literally just opposite sides, pretty much the exact same goal. So, I mean, the second goal it's not like they were actually kicking it directly to Endo. It went through a bunch of traffic and just fell to him. But the idea that like we concede, basically a carbon copy, and there's no adjustment from the defense or anything like that is really frustrating and just sort of indicative of the problems. This is partially why I feel like people need to start blaming the players to some extent too, because obviously there's so much preparation you can do to be put in the correct position to win a match and compete by a coach. But those are the moments where some of the leaders on the team need to step in and make adjustments on the fly to make sure that we can get some of these things under control.
Before we get to the player rant part, Marie, looking coming into this game, looking at all the players that Stuttgart had, Endo isn't someone you naturally be worried about. 2 goals and an assist in this one, man of the match performance. What were your thoughts on Endo? More of like a defensive midfielder, getting the top billing in this one and really making Schalke hurt, especially early on.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one club that's going to build up any other club and any other player, it's Schalke. We have this word for it in German, Schießbudenverein, which is kind of like, when you go to the country fair and you do your shots to win your cuddly toys for your little sister or your girlfriend or yourself. That's pretty much what Schalke has become, just an easy goal. And yeah, Endo, you know what? Like I talked to some Stuttgart people and he's a highly rated player. And there was a sense that he was going to have a kind of big coming out performance at some point. And that just so happened to be this weekend.
Everyone has their best performance against us, right? Career day against Schalke. Yes. Jack kind of alluded to it, player rant. I had my own rant on YouTube as well yesterday. And, this is our 5th manager now. After the match, all the chips fell. We kind of had a feeling during the Stuttgart match that, Christian Gross's days are numbered. But yet another game where we give up 4 or 5 goals, 5 goals in this case. You knew his end was near. And then we wake up in the morning on Sunday, find out that he's gone. And as well as several other people, most notably Sascha Rieder and as well as Joachim Snyder with immediate effect. It was all over the Schalke websites. Wasn't so much of a surprise, but You heard some rumors about possibly, players revolting and this and that. But my whole point was, my rant was, at some point with 5 managers, the players have to be held accountable at some point, right? 5 managers, yes, every department has their issues, but at some point you have to blame the players, right, Jack? It just, no more excuses.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a multifaceted issue, and there's not one specific spot where you can point to and say, hey, that's the issue. But I do feel like there's been a sense for a while that it was like, oh, David Wagner is just a bad coach, or, Manuel Baum not able to turn it around, that kind of thing. Christian Gross gets 1 win and, probably gets more slack than should have at times. You can't tell me that even if some of these hires weren't the best hires, you can't tell me that successive coaches that have had success elsewhere all find the exact same results with the same group of players. And it's not the player's fault to some extent. It's not that I don't think these players are individually, many of them, of a caliber where they're should be perfectly comfortable playing at a Bundesliga level. It's just that I think for whatever reason, this particular collection of them together, the chemistry they have, something else going on, it just doesn't work. And I think until we revamp the squad to a significant degree, this culture that we have in there right now is probably, in the mentality that we have, probably isn't going to get fixed either.
Maria, would you agree? Because it seems like, if you look at the talent that is actually on the roster, there's no reason we should be in a relegation battle. There are actually talented players on here, but for whatever reason, they're just not jiving with each other, not jiving with whatever managers out there, whatever they say. Would you agree with that, or do you have another take?
Yes, I agree with that. I think something that doesn't get enough attention is the psychological aspect of this group of players who, between the end of January 2020 and the middle of January 2021, so a longer period up to that point than the pandemic had been, if anyone can believe that, didn't win a Bundesliga game. I mean, that has implications. We've all played team sports, as I'm sure most of the listeners have at some point in their lives. And if you don't win for 4 weeks in a row, or make that 4 months in a row, it gets harder and harder. Your legs get heavier, your mind goes crazy. You're about to shoot at goal and you're like, oh, but which corner? And it's just that some of that intuition goes adrift. And I think, like David Wagner, for all his faults, one of his strengths that many players pointed out is that he was kind of someone who the young players could turn to. I mean, Arit spoke very highly of him, and him being a kind of like father figure in the dressing room. And you're not going to get that from like Stevens or Christian Gross. And generally, I think the mental block that was caused by being, the laughing stock of Germany, and all these like old men who used to play for Tasmania Berlin were rolled out to reminisce about how it was for them. And I mean, Schalke really dodged that by, an inch in that win, thanks to Matthew Hoppe. But it just seems that hurts deeply, and it's like a thorn that can't really be pulled out of the skin yet. And I don't know if there's anything that could rescue this team mentally this season. I think the only thing that could have helped is maybe having a fresh start last summer, having a new coach with a new philosophy. But as we know, Jochen Schneider missed that boat.
I mean, so do you think that that's the kind of coach that this group of player needs right now, though, is one who's going to be slightly more like fatherly and encouraging and that sort of thing, as opposed to maybe more of like a hardliner? Because I mean, when this Christian Gross move was announced after the sagging Manuel Baum, Richard and I basically said something similar to what you said, which is this actually the personality this group of players needs, given how fragile their psychology is to begin with? Like, I mean, yeah, maybe Manuel Baum didn't turn things around to the extent that we wanted them to, or really at all, because we didn't get the win under him. But at least he was actively coaching on the sidelines constantly and seemed to be a much more supportive and positive figure than Christian Gross, who's a little bit more aloof and burly. And if you believe some of the reports that have been coming out, from the players, maybe just not exactly locked in mentally where he needs to be at this point in his career, as opposed to somebody like Manuel Baum, who was coaching in the Bundesliga very recently and still, with the German national team, has a pretty respectable position prior to coming to Schalke.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of Christian Gross, like calling your players Massimo Schipp and Khan Erdogan So, I mean, like, what? I mean, imagine being the new kid in the office, you know, the first day at work, and you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do for lunch? Do I have to eat in the bathroom? Is other team going to take me out? And they just call you, I don't know, like Robert and Johnson. And it's just like, come on, like, make an effort. And also, like, just as a Bundesliga observer, like, I know he's been abroad, but you're supposed to know these players' names, whether you coach Schalke or Cologne. Like, give me a break. That's just like a lack of preparation, a lack of care. And then I think, I mean, even if you didn't know the names, then learn them. It's like a college professor who knows the names of the people in his class.
He's been there months. He's been there 3 months now, right? I mean, he's been there for
absolutely mind blowing to me. Yeah,
I know. Mac Jangan. He hates it when you call him by a different name.
Yeah, but what you were asking though, just to finish that thought.
I mean, remember.
You were asking about like which coach I think would have been a fit mentality wise or fatherly figure. I think someone who's a motivator and perhaps charismatic enough to draw some attention and pressure away from the dressing room, and someone who, yes, can coddle the players a little bit. So it's hard to think of an ideal, basically, right? Like I was going to say, it's hard to think of anyone but Tedesco. Maybe someone like Florian Kohfeldt at Bremen, or even Adi Hütter at Frankfurt. But we know that these coaches are at clubs that are currently in a much better position financially and athletically than Schalke is. But there are coaches like that, you know. I think that's something to keep in mind. And there are also coaches like that abroad in other leagues in Switzerland, Austria, or further afield. There are coaches like that in the second Bundesliga. I don't think Schalke is uncoachable. I think there's something to be said for like the modern lifespan of a coach of about 18 months that we see at all clubs. You know, like especially like right now, I think Tottenham and Jose Mourinho is another example there. He seems to be running out of steam. But I don't think this set of players, which is so different to like Schalke 3 or 5 years ago, I don't think this set of players is like uncoachable. I just think they are very troubled and need some help.
I think Renee brings up a good point in the chat, saying that, you know, Wagner kind of started this whole thing with the confidence by, you know, publicly making fun of the guys in a way, saying they're not good enough and the squad's not good enough. So I can see how that the guys are very fragile. You know, oh, by the way, we set another record for first Bundesliga club to have 5 managers in a season. This is the worst side in 50 years, I think, over 50 years in the Bundesliga. That beside the point, I think, you know, the point of their fragility of their mindset is very weak. We saw in the last 2 games against Dortmund, we were playing decent. We were doing okay. We were bending but not breaking. But as soon as that first goal happened, you saw the heads drop, right? And then Stuttgart, same thing. As soon as that goal by Endo happened, just guys just completely gave up. I mean, I saw no heart out there on the pitch from what I could see, other than like Michel Langer, who was like fighting after every goal, was yelling at the guys. Everybody else is like, another goal. Okay, what are we gonna do? I think they're very, very fragile. And I think, you know, what kind of manager are we looking at? The hard part is who's going to come into us fight the Bundesliga squad. That's not someone that we, you know, who we are looking for is going to be a top level manager. And there's going to be very few, if any, that are going to want to go to us fight the Bundesliga club. And I think to your point, maybe looking at a lower league or maybe Austria or Switzerland, somewhere like that. I wonder if, I don't know if either of you have any familiarity with Frank Schmidt over at, where is he these days? He's been in the same club for a decade, it seems like. Fight the Bundesliga club, Heidenheim. I don't know if he would be a good fit because he has a tendency to be also very strict, but he's also, the players love him. He's very lovable person, and so his teams fight for him no matter what. He might be, if he was available, you know, he might be someone, if you couldn't get maybe like a Tedesco or someone of that ilk, you know, who's a top manager. Maybe go for someone to fight the Bundesliga because he is someone who's been in the trenches for a while and his clubs play well. It's just I don't know. He may be married to Heidenheim at this point.
Yeah, and also I mean let's remember that Domenico Tedesco was, I think, 31 when he came to Schalke, and he came from a lower league table team in the second Bundesliga, and I think he had like 17 senior games coaching them. So this is a coach that basically became a big name because he went to Schalke. So I don't think, I mean, there's this whole line of argument that young coaches or coaches from other leagues are incapable, like Schalke is too big for them or something. I don't think that's the case. You know, it takes a special person, but if you find that special person, I mean, all coaches got their start like this, whether at Mainz. Mainz has always brought out great coaches, but all coaches, I mean, Hoffenheim, Nagelsmann was promoted internally. So yeah, I think it's just, and that can be an opportunity, you know, like rebuilding in the second league, also from a coaching perspective, can be an opportunity.
And I agree with you, because the idea that, you know, Schalke's too big for certain people. Well, it's, if you look at our coaching record in terms of how many coaches we've had over the past decade or so, it's too big or too something for literally everybody. So I don't know why it would be like self-selective in that way and try to like limit, like, you know, who we think is a viable option from, I mean, because no one's really having that much success. And, you know, at this point, it's not that we can't, you know, do due diligence and really try to find the right person who's going to be able to take us forward. But it's hard to not view Schalke as a poison chalice for a lot of coaches. And yeah, certainly somebody will take the job, obviously, but we might not be able to be as selective as I think we would ideally like to be. The idea that we're going to get some big name manager in is, I think, probably a little optimistic.
Dirk says Felix Magath. Just kidding. You know, I think the interesting question right now, at least with the manager, is do Schalke look for their manager for next season this season, or do they have a caretaker, right? In the interim, I think it's going to be a mix of Asamoah and man, my mind's drawing blank tonight because I'm so angry with everything that's going on lately. It's basically the trainers, Buskins. He's going to be helping out there. So, you know, what do you think Schalke should do? Should they look for the manager this season or not? Because there's a lot of people saying that we shouldn't look for our next season's manager this season, because last thing we want is the poor momentum to continue on and then add on to next season. Might as well start fresh. Jack, what are your thoughts in terms of looking for a manager this season?
If you think you have the right candidate and that person is available now and potentially wouldn't be available come the summer, then I think you make the move. Yeah. But if you have, you know, potentially a number of candidates you think are roughly equal in your mind, that maybe there's not as much of a immediate deadline for something like that, then I can understand the argument about trying to have a clean break postseason and a fresh start and not have any of this season's performances taint what could be a fresh campaign next year.
Marie, do you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, exactly what Jack said. I think we have to be careful that, I mean, I don't think that this season can be, you know, rescued. I think at this point we'd be pleased if Schalke manages to win another game and score some nice goals and maybe develop some of these young players, give them some more minutes, maybe see Huntelaar again. You know, it's kind of like a nostalgia trip at this point. And if you put in a coach now who you want to rebuild, you're going to burn that coach. And that's just not fair. So I think realistically, I do think that a lot of coaches will still like the challenge. We got to remember, like, football is also a very ego-driven sport where, you know, people believe very much that they can do things others can't. So I think there will be coaches who would love to work at Schalke more than other clubs, but I think they want that in the summer and not right now.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really hurt this club in particular, is that the coronavirus with the shortened off season. I think, you know, not having those extra months in the middle to really kind of work out some of the kinks that we had heading into the season probably hurt Wagner a lot. Not that, you know, I don't know if he would have done anything at all, but still, you know, not having that extra time, I think, to help figure things out, I'm sure hurt in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting, you know, seeing how the weeks come up the next few. I mean, I'm at that point where I'm like, we're going to fight the Bundesliga. I mean, we have to pull a miracle here. There's 6 wins that we can still get, but that's going to take a miracle, I think, based off what we're playing at the moment. You know, you've seen, of all the managers we had this season, you know, at least under Baum, the team looked like they had a chance at games that they could have won. I haven't seen that yet with Gross. We had that one game with Hoffenheim. That was great. And then we kind of went downhill from there, especially the last several games. It's looked eerily to the end of the Tedesco era where where every game we're giving up 4 or 5 goals a game. And so it's not pretty at this moment. And should we be at this point? I mean, it looks like the club may be looking at despite the Bundesliga at this point, trying to get their chips in line. I know one of the questions I think from Edwin came in the chat about sponsorship. That's going to be tricky because if we do get relegated, I think some of those sponsorships will drop, like Gazprom possibly. Do you know, what are you hearing, at least from your context, Marie, about, what the club is trying to do in these last, 24 to 48 hours since the news broke about Gross and Schneider and everybody leaving? Have you heard anything that maybe we haven't heard?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just to go back to the sponsorship question, that was actually a topic of some debate over the Christmas break and in early January, because I don't know if we all recall the moment where Tönnies kind of tried to sneak his way back in through the back door and through his company. So part of his cured meat empire and sausage empire is Böcklunder, who are one of the kind of second tier sponsors at Schalke. So you see their name, for example, when the players have a press conference, you always see that brand on the kind of billboard with all the advertisers behind the players and the coaches. And Böcklunder renegotiated their deal with Schalke actually in favor of Schalke as a kind of heads up, we're here to support your regional company. And that was very much Tönnies's work. And he kind of insisted that of the 9 people on Schalke's board, it had to be unanimous that people were in favor of extending that contract and having him and on top of that, he was gonna grant an emergency loan to Schalke, I think in the 18 million euros, if anyone wants to correct me in the comments, or one of you two. I think that was the sum that was debated. And then of the 9 votes, there were 7 in favor and 2 abstentions. And then Tönnies was like, no, I can't do it now. I don't have, and it's just like, he was just being such a diva about it. And I'm sorry, it was just a ridiculous, theatrical, intonation. I just couldn't believe it. And then anyway, so then Böcklunder did extend the contract, I think until so 2 more years than the original term, which helped Jochen Schneider at the time really kind of pull through some of those deals in the winter break, with Mustafi and Kolasinac and Huntelaar, because it gave them some certainty in their financial planning. So that was an example, I think, of one of those sponsors. I did also hear that Gazprom will go into the second Bundesliga with Schalke. That's not a contract that is going to be, void or anything like that.
I think Marie froze here for a second.
But in terms of something, sorry about that. No, I was just going to say, in the last few days, something that's happened that might be worth keeping an eye on is this audio app that we have all now, Clubhouse. A lot of Schalke legends are kind of having fun on there, including, legends is a very broad term, but a lot of former Schalke players like Andy Möller, Gerald Asamoah, even Van Hoogdalen. A lot of these players use Clubhouse and constantly entering these rooms. So these discussions, it's kind of like a live podcast, right?
Right.
And just venting about Schalke, or just you hear their voice and they're so emotional. And so I would just recommend that our listeners go on Clubhouse to hear, because these players and these people, they say things that you probably wouldn't hear in other places. And maybe we'll soon be quoting from Clubhouse. Yeah.
There's no truth to the rumor that Tony's is actually listening into the podcast and try to mess up Marie's audio there.
I remember at the time when the loan offer was made, I think what Richard and I said on the podcast was just in regards to the attorneys, was just read the room, man. We appreciate it, but just read the room. No one really wants you here that visibly at the moment. Can you just chill for a bit? And so
calm down.
I don't know, but if we are able to renegotiate some of these deals to extend them and make sure they're still viable going into this fight of Bundesliga, that's obviously super important for our solvency and our ability to overhaul the squad and revamp things going forward. So to the extent that those things have already happened, that's nice to see.
Someone in the chat says, "Who are you guys?" We don't know. We don't know who we are anymore. The elephant in the room that I think, Jack and I brought up a while ago that isn't really being talked about these days, especially now as this Fight the Bundesliga looks like it's more and more a certainty. And I think Dirk just brought it up in the chat, and he says, wouldn't we have a tough time to get a license for Fight the Bundesliga with the debt that we have? And that's what we kind of brought up a while ago, is that there's no guarantee that we will get that license into this Fight the Bundesliga with the amount of debt we have. I mean, how, Marie, from what you know at least, how is it more of a certainty that we will get the license than not? Because I know that's something that's still looming over many of us, is like, that's a possibility too. We could follow the way of 1860 and some of these other clubs that, just completely couldn't afford it and just kept dropping and dropping. What do you know about that situation in terms of getting a license for the Zweite Bundesliga should we hit that inevitable route?
Yeah, good point to make. I think German journalists have done a decent job of asking these tough questions of those in charge, including the CFO of Schalke, so to speak, whose name I've forgotten. She is quite new to the position, and she gave an interview basically saying that it's almost guaranteed, and that it would be possible for Schalke to go down and get the license for the second Bundesliga and play there. But it was either her or Alexander Jobst, the CMO, who really underlined in an interview with Handelsblatt, the German financial paper, that it's really only one season that Schalke can actually cope being in the second Bundesliga. Everything else would be very painful. And I mean, we also got to remember Peter Peters, the former CFO, Alexander Jobst, and Jochen Schneider. This time last year, can you believe it? It's been like a year of this shit around us with COVID. This time last year, they were like, a week after the Bundesliga stopped, they were like, Schalke is at risk, like an existential risk. And everyone laughed. Everyone was like, what do you mean? It's Schalke, And like everyone has to forget about the income from ticketing. So it was like, why Schalke? Why are you being so dramatic? Why are you like trying to be all special? And then we saw how bad it actually is. And yeah, I mean, it's a club that was built to play in Europe year in, year out, really in the Champions League year in, year out. And then we had Christian Heidel, who spent on transfers and on salaries like he wanted Schalke to be a top 10 European club. And like 2 or 3 years later, we're going to be in the second Bundesliga. So it's not a good future, to be honest. I mean, financially speaking, it's very, very dire. And the club has to hope that fans can be allowed back in the stadium soon and that they'll want to come back, because I'm sure they'll want to pay less to watch games against Sandhausen and Heidenheim. And hopefully, the club will be able to even sell out the Veltins Arena on match days.
Well, don't forget, we also have the second most expensive training facilities in Europe, so we still got to pay for that off. So maybe the ticket prices will stay high. Oh man, Jack, it's before we get off this Fight the Bundesliga kick. It's difficult times right now, and I mean, what are you? Is this starting to become a reality to you? Are you still thinking? Are you still being Mr. Optimistic? I know my optimism has waned incredibly since especially the last couple of weeks, specifically this past weekend. How is your optimism looking at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think every time a new manager comes in,
it goes down.
No, I mean, well, yes and no. There's a very short-term, possibility of optimism in the sense that, like, hey, maybe this new coach will somehow find a way to unlock something in the squad that no one else has been able to. But at this point, I think we have enough of a sample size to suggest that's probably not going to happen. I mean, yeah, it's what we said. I was going to stay optimistic, I think, through the Winterpause. And we did get, the win coming out of it, but the performances after that have been awful. And I was not happy with what I saw in the Dortmund game in particular. I think there were moments of that performance that were very worrying, because if that's how we're playing in a derby, I mean, independent of the situation we're in the league, it's a bad sign. And then we come right out of that and have an even, worse loss from a goal difference perspective to Stuttgart. So yeah, I do. I mean, obviously, until it's mathematically locked up, it's not inevitable. But yeah, I really don't see anything that leads me to believe we're gonna see the turnaround. It just week after week, it's just not there. There's nothing to hold on to really, in terms of what you're seeing on the pitch.
I think the scary part about what Marie was talking about just before about we only have enough money possibly for one year in Zweite Bundesliga with the licensing, and we've talked in numerous amount of times about how difficult it is to come back out of Zweite Bundesliga. Yeah, some clubs do go down and come right back up. Majority don't right away. They struggle. I mean, look at Hamburg. What's this fourth season now? They might not even get out this year. So it's extremely difficult. And I mean, even Renee brought up some of the points up in the chat about how, like, yes, we can sell all this, all our bunch of assets that we have, sponsorships, players, etc. But we're not going to have any money to field a strong team. We're going to have to rely heavily on the Knappenschmiede and then maybe some of the free players that stick around or whatever. But it's going to be difficult, Marie. What have you seen from some of these other clubs that have gone down in recent years? They just struggle mightily, it seems like. I mean, Hamburg is the most recent one that, a big giant that fell for the first time and then they stay down. What have you seen from them that is a worrying sign for Schalke?
Yeah, I think that there's cases on both sides. I mean, we've also seen clubs like Stuttgart. I mean, Stuttgart, when they went down in 2016, they hadn't been down in about 20 years. Like 8 years or something, or 10 years before that, they were Bundesliga champions. So this Stuttgart, in many ways, in terms of its fans, is a top 5 German club, period. It's got a great youth academy, a big history, very regionally connected. People forget about it because it's Stuttgart, but it's a big club and with big sponsors, and so I think that's a good club to compare it with. And of course, they did go back up. I think they went back after 2 years, and Cologne, when Cologne was relegated, they also went straight back up. Nuremberg managed to come back up after a few years. Hanover has gone up and down. So it's more kind of like, what type of club will Schalke be? Will we be a sort of so-called elevator club that just keeps going up and down, like Hanover and Nuremberg? Or will Schalke be like a Cologne or Stuttgart that can maybe clinch their way back into the Bundesliga? And Frankfurt, I mean, remember Frankfurt, not too long ago was also a club that went up and down a lot. So there are these different cases, and I think it has so much to do with who's in charge. Because there are, like, at the end of the day, you have these type of players who perform well in the upper, third of the second Bundesliga or the bottom third of the Bundesliga, like just generally decent players who just get transferred from team to team or whatever. And then it's just a matter of assembling a group that is strong enough to perform where they are. And that's the job of those in charge. And for that, you need good scouting, you need a good sporting director. So something I talked to someone who's very well connected at Mainz for a piece I did 2 years ago on Christian Heidel, when Suazerda and Amin Arid were starting to perform really well. And I was like, oh, maybe we were too harsh on Heidel. And he just said to me, look, Heidel is someone who does not tolerate people in power around him. He is someone who kind of like, when someone is rising internally, he's like, no, you go back down. And apparently there are all these clubs that basically pay for these really expensive scouting database licenses, kind of like advanced versions of Transfermarkt, where you can search by position, age, etc., left foot, right foot. There are obviously now, I mean, we know about this explosion of data analytics. So there are all these services where a license is anywhere from like 20,000 to multiple million a year. And apparently to find players, Heidel would just sit in front of his computer and do that.
He plays Football Manager.
Yeah, plays Football Manager, FIFA career mode.
Yes.
Yeah.
He plays Football Manager. And, scouts were like, dude, Christian, we can fly to Romania and watch this player. And he's like, no, it's fine. And it's just, I mean, come on. Like, this is like European top football. I mean, whether you're at Mainz or Schalke, this is like the A-leagues. And so Schalke did the opposite and brought in Michael Reschke, who's one of the best in this position. But multiple people have told me is very hard to work with on a personal level. So it's kind of like, I feel like the club is yo-yoing behind like the fun people who it's like nice to have a beer with, like Christian Heidel, and then the other end, like the really dull technocrats like Jochen Schneider, who just kept bringing in people he knew at Stuttgart and Leipzig. That was like his whole network was, yeah, let's bring in Christian Groß. He was once at Stuttgart, or like this person who was once at Leipzig. And it's just, come on, like I just think, to me, sorry, I'm ranting, but sometimes football, I mean, it's such an important business. I mean, in Germany, apparently 75,000 people are employed through professional soccer.
I think I say through Jochen Schneider at Schalke.
Yeah, can you imagine? All the communications agencies around Germany, like on their payroll to help him be more interesting. No, it's just like, and then there's so little innovation, you know, like it's just incomprehensible to me that an industry watched and beloved by so many, that's been around for so long, especially compared to like US sports, where innovation is, you know, much more welcome. Yeah, I think rant over, but you get my drift.
Yeah, I do think the leadership is going to be probably the most important factor going forward, because I mean, now we're at a point where we don't have a coach, we don't have a sporting director, and these next hires that get made have to be the right ones if we're going to have any chance of bouncing right back up and potentially forestalling, you know, more serious pain down the road. I guess the one thing I'm concerned about with Schalke, though, is just kind of how sudden this is. Whereas at least with Hamburg, they were kind of flirting with it for a while, weren't they? You know, avoiding the drop, but they were in relegation play. I mean, they were kind of
5 years or so
in and around there, and so at least they were kind of prepared for it potentially. I'm saying it wasn't a big blow for them, obviously, but this Schalke thing has gone from European football to this in a matter of like just a couple years out of nowhere. You know, I mean, winter break last season, we're in the Europa League spots basically, and then suddenly it's just we win one game in over a calendar year. So I'm concerned about like how bad the momentum is and how serious the momentum is, and whether or not that's going to be a bigger problem for us trying to reverse that and get a fresh slate than it would be for potentially some other clubs who go down, and maybe that's not as big of a blow for them.
I think it's going to be. I think, Jack, you're 100% right. Who we pick as to lead the sporting role to take over Jochen Schneider is going to be huge, because I think depending on what kind of qualifications they have, what kind of their plan they have, it's going to determine whether we bounce right back up or we're going to be a yo-yo club or struggle mightily. A lot hinges on that, I think, and so we'll have to tune in the next, you know, several weeks or however long it takes before they make this decision, because it's going to be a big one. It's going to be one of the biggest ones in the club's history, at least recent history, right? So it's going to be something we all got to keep our eyes on. Marie, before we talk about Mainz real quick, we did have a question towards you in the chat. Jack and I had been talking the last couple of weeks. So we had Curtis Smith on last week. We were talking about the 50+1 rule. I think we've talked about it in the past, but what are your thoughts on that real quick? For or against it? What were your thoughts overall?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a strength and a weakness, right? It's a peculiarity that makes German football very special, in the sense that as members, and Schalke has 160,000 of them, fee-paying members, the fans rule the club and can influence the club and make decisions and go to these meetings, and the board is accountable to them. You know, the board was always interested in being popular with the fans, much more so than at other clubs where it's, you know, no fans at training, like in the Premier League. Fans on Twitter are just kind of like tolerated or whatever, and fans are seen as like customers, you know, they're basically just clients. And that's not the case in Germany. Like when the ultras demand that a person is fired, that person might not be fired straight away, but like shit's going down, you know. This is just very different, and it's very special. It's even more special so at Schalke, where for many of the people in that environment, it is basically the purpose of their life is this club. So we got to keep that in mind. And I think in many ways, the fans sometimes they're the constant, right? They're always going to be there. Like the board comes and goes, people in charge come and go, but they have a kind of sixth sense for what's right for the club that people who think they know better don't. So that's the strength of it, right? The weakness, I think, is that football has moved on and other clubs have opened themselves to investment in successful ways. Yeah. And the question is now, if Schalke were to do that, would it be successful? And my belief is that in the current constellation, it would not be successful because Schalke has never looked as weak in the last 30 years as it does right now. I mean, if you open yourselves to investment now, you're basically saying it's like a bad stock, right? It's like saying, oh, buy Yahoo stock now instead of 30 years ago, or buy. It's just a timing thing,
Yeah.
And it.
If we were to make that jump, as a club, you would want to have that decision be made in a moment where we are strong and where we can really think this thing through, where we're not potentially under influences because of desperation or something and get rushed into a situation that can very quickly get out of our control. So I definitely agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah, beggars can't be choosers, and Schalke right now is desperate for any cash flow. There are these emergency funds like that they're demanding from the federal state of North Rhine-Westphalia as like a security. And it's just so shameful. It's so shameful. And this is not the time to be like, oh, look at our project. Here's our like pitch deck, this is what we could be. It's more like, let's assure that this club is still standing in the summer. So I think it's more important in the here and now not to think of that as like a Hail Mary solution to everything, but just to think baby steps towards getting back to some stability.
No doubt about that. By the way, if you're listening in on YouTube live here with us, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give us a like. We much appreciated. A must-win match as they all have been as of late, but it's a big one. It's against our direct rivals in Mainz coming up this Friday. We have to win this game no matter what. I think for me, at least, what I want to see for the remainder of the season, whether we pull this miracle or not, is some respectability, right? Some effort in these matches. I want to see it. I want to see the guys try. We haven't seen that in a long time, it seems like, other than that maybe Hoffenheim match or a couple matches after that. Jack, I'll start with you. What are you looking at from this Mainz game? What are you looking to see, I should say? I mean, a win obviously would be nice, but what are you looking in particular going into this matchup on Friday?
I do want to be somewhat careful about just saying, there's no effort as like a blanket statement on the pitch, because I don't know if that's true all the time. I think there's the problem is a lot of it's mental in terms of people just switching off at the wrong moment, particularly on the defensive end, and then obviously just poor coaching, which is not helping us advance the ball into dangerous areas. I mean, I don't want to.
I don't want to get blown out. How about that? I don't want to get blown out.
That's fine. Yeah, I feel like in the Stuttgart game we saw effort at least. I mean, the second half was a lot better than the first half for the most part until the two wild goals at the end. So I don't want to just make that blanket statement. As far as the Mainz thing goes, it's just we need a win. However that comes, I don't care. There's not anything I'm particularly looking for other than the result. I hope that, like I said a little bit earlier, alluded to earlier, having yet another manager fired does something to give the players a boost, either through focus or whatever, and they're able to use that to get a result. But I mean, the whole idea of like the new manager boost, whatever thing is kind of a myth anyway to some extent. It doesn't really get borne out by the stats. So who knows, man? It's just gotta have it. Just gotta have it. However it comes, gotta have it. That's it.
Marie, how about you? What are you looking from this matchup?
Goals. I mean, Schalke had it got lost somewhere in the muddle because 5-1 is a terrible scoreline against a promoted team. But Schalke had shots on target. Schalke had good opportunities through Suazerda, Alessandro Schöpf, Suazerda again. And really, if Bentaleb had converted the penalty, I mean, again, like how poor can your luck be? This is the guy who had like converted like 17 of 17 penalties before.
Yeah.
And then, like, what? I was like, come on, like.
Yeah, the thing was, like, when they were arguing over that, like, I mean, there's a separate conversation you can have about whether or not it was a good idea for Bentaleb to, in that moment, try to like upset what was already predetermined ahead of the match if it was. But from a pure, like, who would you rather have taking the penalty, Harit or Bentaleb? I don't think there's a single Schalke supporter that's going to say Harit.
Correct.
Given Bentaleb's record.
He's called Bentaleb for a reason.
Yeah, Marie's spot on. Unfortunately, it was just a terrible penalty hit into what I always call on this podcast that no man's land zone. That's like not in the middle of the goal, not on the post. It's exactly where the goalkeeper tends to fall if he guesses correctly. And it was a poor penalty. But yeah, I mean, it's a great point. It's how bad can your luck be that a guy that's normally that lights out just completely hits a dud in that moment. And maybe that's psychology too. Maybe it's the pressure. Who knows?
Yeah. And you could tell after that miss that he definitely was hurt by that. And, I think one of the big tells of the game was, Harit had a great opportunity early on in the game. I think something like 4 minutes in or something like that. There's a wide open Matthew Hoppe in front of the goal, and he tries to shoot it through a couple guys. And, granted, you want your player to go for goal. But at that moment, I think the best opportunity probably would have been to go into Hoppe. But, it is what it is. But some guys saying you look like a streamer, Jack. Anyway, a big fan of yours there. Yeah, it's going to be a crazy game. Hopefully we have a better performance, make it a closer game, or at least give some goals. We definitely need some goals in this one. But we need to have a win. We need to have many wins between now and the end of the season. But yeah, let's see. Hopefully they can prove me wrong and get some a nice little run going here. But I guess we'll see. It's a big game Friday night that we're all going to be watching intently as going forward, especially with all the news going around lately with the movement. Let's wrap it up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to completely go back on what I said a minute ago when I said all I care about is the result. I want to see a slightly different lineup as well. Like, yeah. I'm tired of where's Bozdogan? Just like consistently sitting on the bench, never gets subbed into the game. That William Timo, well, not William, wow. William Timo Becker stack, like, I mean, William got pulled out earlier in that match for the amount of success that Leverkusen were having down the left-hand side. I don't know. I feel like I haven't been fully satisfied with the starting 11 in a while in terms of it's just not quite what I would pick. So hopefully some of that gets changed up, but who knows?
It's funny how in the past when we had a constant rotation of starting 11s, we always like, give us consistency. Now we get consistency. We're like, this isn't working. It's just the whole same team.
Yeah, and I know we have a ton of injuries right now, so I'm not trying to be that critical of it from that perspective. But there's still things that happen every match where I'm just like, and I'm not the coach. I'm not in training, obviously, like that. I'm not qualified to make these decisions. But it'd just be nice if every once in a while I'd be like, yes, I agree with what we're doing in terms of even like approaching the game. That would be nice for once.
Yeah. No, it definitely would. All right, let's wrap this bad boy up. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you sign up for the Schalke US newsletter. Simply put in your email address, and you'll get information on the club, all the great clubs across North America, and obviously as well as our podcast. So make sure you do that. Keep tuning in each week as we bring you the latest from the Royal Blues, good, bad, and the ugly. Any topics you would like us to discuss, just send us a tweet at SchalkeMerica or find us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you can find us, you'll find us. We'd like to give a special shout out to our guest, Marie Shubo. Marie, your chance to plug away. Talk about your transfer exchange show that you're on right now, and anything else. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, this was fun as always. I loved being on, and if you want to hear more about the other 17 Bundesliga teams on a weekly basis, then follow at Transfer Exchange, the Transfer Exchange on Twitter. They have a weekly video podcast, much like this one, where they bring in experts of European soccer, and I do their Bundesliga coverage. So every Sunday at 7 p.m. British time, so that's 8 p.m. German time and 2 p.m. for the Americans, I do what's called Marie's Bundesliga Minutes and talk about the big themes of the Bundesliga. So in the most recent episode, I talked about Jamal Musiala with the German national team, which came as a surprise for many because he grew up mainly in England. And I talked about where Sancho may be going in the summer, and it's not Man United, in my opinion. It could be another team. And about Haaland's future and about this team. So if you want to hear more about Schalke, then watch that video after this. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. And obviously you can follow her handle. It's right there on the screen for you. Jack, where can our followers find you on social media?
where would we be without Marie? I dare not let my mind wander to
Yeah.
such depressing places.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us once again. Always a pleasure. You can find me on Twitter at JMMangan, JMMangan.
Very good. And as always, you can follow me at R_KHARMAN on anywhere on social media. Until the next podcast comes, our friends, or until the news breaks, we'll catch you then. Tschüss.